Under a sky that had not yet decided between day and night, a child was born, a girl whose first breath came as the last light of the eclipse faded. Her name was Namra. When she opened her eyes, they shimmered faintly, as if tiny stars had been trapped inside them. The elders whispered that such a child could not belong entirely to the earth. Some said she was touched by the gods, others murmured that she was born of both the sun and the shadow. And in that village, where belief was as strong as breath, her difference became both her wonder and her curse. As she grew, her glow became more visible in the dusk. Children would follow her at twilight just to see the faint gleam that followed her steps. When she laughed, it was like the sound of silver water running over stone. When she sang, the air seemed to still as though listening. Yet, beneath the admiration lay fear, a quiet, crawling fear that whispered into the ears of the jealous. Light that shines where none should shine, they said, is a light that brings ruin. Her father, a quiet hunter with gentle hands, loved her deeply, but he was not strong against the poison of others' words. After her mother's death, he remarried, a woman named Yelena, whose beauty was sharp as the edge of a blade. Yelena had a daughter, Mara, a girl with a smile like a knife. Together they watched Namra with eyes that measured and compared. To them, her shimmer was not a gift, it was a reminder that some beauty could never be earned. At night, when the moonlight kissed the roofs of the clay huts, Yelena would whisper to her daughter, "She is not like us. That light will turn to fire one day. You'll see." And Mara would nod, her envy glowing darker than the shadows. Soon the whisper spread, first to the well, then to the market, until even the elders began to avert their gaze. Mothers warned their children not to follow Namra after dusk, and the laughter that once followed her now turned into cruel songs. Namra heard them all. The words, the laughter, the lies. Yet she did not harden. She would walk to the edge of the village, beyond the fields where the night grew thick, and there she would find her refuge, the cave of old stone, hidden behind a curtain of vines. Inside, the darkness seemed endless, but it did not frighten her. In that stillness, her faint glow danced along the walls, painting ripples of soft light across the rock. The bats above fluttered softly, and the air hummed with quiet comfort. It was there that she began to sing. Low at first, a hum that barely touched the silence. Then a melody, wordless but deep, like the memory of rain before a storm. The sound echoed through the chamber, brushing against unseen corners. And something remarkable happened. The darkness began to listen. The air itself seemed to move with her voice, the cave pulsing with gentle warmth. It was as though the shadows leaned closer, curious, enchanted by the light that did not burn but soothed. Sometimes she would imagine her mother sitting beside her, smiling as she used to when Namra was small. "Your light is not a curse," she would whisper in her memory. "It's a reflection of what's inside." Those words were all Namra carried through the days of cruelty and coldness. When she returned home, Yelena would scowl, demanding to know where she had been. "Speaking to spirits again?" she would hiss. "Be careful, girl. The dark may answer." Namra would bow her head and stay silent, her heart trembling not with fear but with sorrow. She knew her stepmother saw only the glow, never the soul behind it. Each night she returned to her cave, to sing and to breathe without judgment. The darkness no longer frightened her, it embraced her, wrapping around her like an old friend. And deep within that ancient stone hollow, something unseen stirred, faintly glowing in rhythm with her song. It was as if the cave itself had begun to remember what light felt like. Namra's world was shrinking in the village, but within the cave, it was expanding, alive, waiting. The darkness had learned her name, and though she did not yet know it, the shadows were listening for more than her voice. They were waiting for her to need them. Jealousy, like smoke from a hidden fire, began to curl through the heart of Meroa. She could no longer bear the sight of Namra's calm face, her quiet grace, or those strange eyes that shimmered even in darkness. Wherever they went, people noticed her, not because she tried to be seen but because she could not help it. The light in her gaze drew attention like moths to a flame, and that quiet admiration from others was enough to twist Meroa's heart into something bitter. At first she tried to hide it behind false smiles. She would stroke Namra's hair and say, "You are beautiful, child, but beauty fades when the sun sets." But her words always carried a sting, a little poison that dripped slowly with time. When the villagers spoke kindly of Namra, Meroa would roll her eyes and mutter that beauty without control was danger. And soon she found someone willing to listen to her venom, the village chief. The chief was an old man, cautious and proud, one who feared what he could not understand. Meroa visited him under the pretense of concern. She carried gifts of grain and oil, bowed low and whispered, Chief, the girl born under the eclipse, she glows in the dark. Have you not seen it? The children speak of it. They say when she walks by the river, even the stones glimmer. Such light cannot be natural. The chief frowned, uncertain. Perhaps the spirits favor her, he said. Maroa's lips curved into a small, convincing smile. Or perhaps the spirits use her. I have seen things, Chief, the way her light flickers when the moon rises. Maybe it is not light at all but the hunger of something that feeds on the night. The words clung to his mind like cobwebs. In a land where belief was as sacred as breath, doubt spread faster than truth. Soon, whispers began moving from hut to hut, carried by lips too eager for stories. They say her light calls to the dead. They say she steals warmth from the living. She was born when the sun died. Can any good come of that? Namra felt the change before she heard the words. People stopped meeting her eyes. Children who once played near her door were now pulled away by fearful mothers. Even the fruit sellers turned their baskets when she passed. The laughter that once filled the air became silence that pressed heavy on her chest. She would walk through the market feeling the weight of every gaze that dared not meet hers. When she returned home, Maroa would sigh, feigning sorrow. You see, child? I warned you. Your glow unsettles people. Maybe you should not go out so much. Perhaps the light is better kept hidden. And though the tone was gentle, the meaning was sharp. Stay unseen. Namra tried to obey, though it broke her heart. At night, she still visited her cave, singing softly into the darkness, whispering her grief into the stones. The shadows, ever patient, wrapped around her like a shawl. The cave became her confessional, her one refuge from a world that refused to understand her. But even in isolation, she refused to let hatred take root. She still greeted her stepmother each morning with a quiet good day. She still fetched water for the home and tended to the hearth. When Mara, her stepsister, mocked her, imitating her soft voice, pretending to glow with false light, Namra only smiled sadly. Mock me if it brings you joy, she said once, her voice steady, but do not mock the light that protects us all. Her words unsettled Mara, though she did not know why. There was no malice in Namra's tone, only truth. And so the whispers grew louder. The chief, uneasy, ordered that no one should walk near Namra's cave at night. He feared that her songs might wake the spirits. Some claimed they saw shadows dancing near the cave entrance, glowing faintly like eyes in the dark. Fear wrapped the village in its cold embrace, and Namra became its prisoner, not behind walls but behind superstition. Yet within her heart, no bitterness bloomed. She still prayed for those who cursed her, still wept quietly for their fear. If only they could see, she whispered to the cave one night, her voice trembling, that my light is not their enemy. The darkness responded with a low hum, soft like the breath of something alive. It seemed to say they will learn in time. So Namra continued to glow, faintly, gently, as though the light in her eyes had chosen forgiveness over fury. While the village grew colder, her cave grew warmer. And somewhere in the depths of that listening dark, the shadows were learning from her what envy could never understand, that even when surrounded by lies, light does not need to shout to be seen. The night the storm came, the air was thick and restless. The wind howled through the trees like the voices of ancestors crying warnings that no one could understand. Clouds rolled low and heavy, swallowing the moon, and lightning danced across the sky like silver serpents. The villagers huddled in their homes, whispering prayers, clutching charms, and glancing toward the hills where Namra's cave lay hidden behind a curtain of vines. Then it appeared, a strange flickering light, neither fire nor lightning. It hovered briefly above the rooftops, pulsing softly before vanishing into the storm. Fear rippled through the village like a wave breaking against stone. Old men muttered of omens, women crossed their wrists against evil, and children hid their faces. When thunder roared again, Maroa rose from her mat, her eyes gleaming with opportunity. It's her, she said, voice trembling with false dread. The cursed one. The girl who glows. She has called the spirits down upon us. Her words sliced through the fear like a blade through cloth. In a heartbeat, belief turned to panic. Villagers poured into the rain, torches blazing in the wind. Shadows jumped across their faces as they shouted Namra's name, demanding she come forth. She emerged slowly from her hut, soaked in the downpour, her faint glow flickering softly like a candle struggling to stay alive. I have done nothing, she tried to say, her voice steady but small against the roaring wind. The light is not. Lies. Maroa screamed, pointing a trembling hand. Every storm begins when she sings. Every sickness comes when she walks the fields. Look at her eyes, they shine even when the sky is dead. She feeds on the moon. The crowd murmured, half in fear, half in fury. Lock her away, someone shouted. Let the spirits take her if they must. Namra's father stood frozen, torn between love and fear. When the chief arrived, leaning on his carved staff, the torches bowed before him. His gaze lingered on Namra, his lips pressed into a grim line. If the people believe you are cursed, he said, then peace will not return until you are gone. Gone. The word struck her like thunder. Chief, she pleaded, I have brought harm to no one. The light is not my doing, it has been with me since birth. It means no evil. But her words were swallowed by the wind. The villagers moved closer, forming a circle around her, their faces slick with rain and fear. They carried ropes and stones, charms carved with symbols to ward off spirits. Take her to the cave, the chief said at last. Let her rest where the darkness may claim her. Hands grabbed her arms, rough and unkind. She did not struggle. Her tears mixed with the rain as she was led through the muddy paths toward the hills. The storm raged harder, lightning painting the night in cruel flashes. When they reached the cave, the only place that had ever known her songs, Namra's heart broke silently. The vine she had once brushed aside now hung like a veil for her tomb. They pushed her inside. She stumbled, falling to her knees on the cold stone floor. The villagers began stacking rocks at the entrance, one by one, sealing her fate. Meroa watched with triumph thinly veiled by feigned sorrow. You brought this on yourself, she said softly. Light cannot live among shadows. Namra lifted her head. Her eyes glowed brighter than they ever had before, twin stars defying the storm. Then perhaps, she said, voice clear despite the thunder, the shadows will learn to see. Meroa froze, unnerved by the calm in her tone. Seal it, someone shouted, and the final stones were placed. Charms carved with ancestral sigils were hung upon the wall, their whispers lost in the roar of the wind. Inside the cave, silence fell. Only the faint dripping of water broke the stillness. Namra leaned against the stone, her breath shallow but steady. Darkness wrapped around her, heavy and endless, yet she did not tremble. Her fingertips traced the cold rock as she whispered the last words that would touch the world outside. Even in darkness, I will still see. Outside the storm broke. The winds quieted, and the strange light vanished from the sky. The villagers took it as a sign that the curse was contained, that peace would return. But in the silence that followed, deep within the cave, something began to stir, not in anger but in awakening. The darkness, long forgotten and still, had found its companion. It began to listen again to the faint heartbeat of the girl it had claimed. And for the first time in centuries the shadows trembled, not from fear but from wonder. The first hours inside the cave were a blur of cold and silence. The air was thick, unmoving, pressing against Namra's lungs like unseen hands. Each breath came with effort, fogging in the darkness. The echo of the last stone placed outside still rang faintly in her mind, sealing not just her body, but the last connection she had to the world above. The villagers' voices had faded into the storm, and now only the low drip of water from the ceiling marked the passing of time. Her trembling fingers brushed against the ground, rough, uneven stone, damp with centuries of untouched air. Her heart raced and fear crept through her veins like frost. So this is what they call darkness, she whispered, her voice a small sound swallowed by the vast emptiness. Her body curled inward for warmth, and she closed her eyes though it made no difference. Here, the absence of light was total. But then something stirred. At first, it was only a faint stirring of wind, strange because there should have been none. The air shifted, cool and deliberate, as if the cave itself had taken a slow, deep breath. Namra froze. Her eyes opened and faint light shimmered from within them, casting a fragile halo across the rocks. The walls glistened where her glow touched them, like wet stone waking from a long dream. Then came the whispers. Soft, broken, almost human. They rose from the very walls, sliding through the cracks and corners like sighs of memory. Namra's fear deepened, but so did her curiosity. Who speaks? She whispered. No reply came, only a low hum, deep and resonant, like the earth itself was murmuring in its sleep. The shadows around her began to move. Slowly at first, then in graceful swirls, forming delicate shapes that hovered in the faint glow of her eyes. They moved like smoke from an unseen fire, weightless, fluid, almost alive. Namra watched them mesmerized. They did not lunge or threaten. Instead, they seemed to respond to her breath, her heartbeat, her trembling wonder. When she reached out a cautious hand, one of the shadowed forms brushed past her fingertips. It felt cool but not cold, more like the touch of wind on water. As her glow strengthened, the darkness retreated just enough to reveal what had long been hidden. Across the walls were carvings, ancient and intricate, symbols that twisted in circular patterns, like suns drawn within moons. They shimmered faintly, reacting to her presence. Namra stepped closer, her light spreading farther. The markings looked alive, their lines flowing as though made of molten silver beneath stone. One symbol stood out among them, a spiral of light surrounded by eyes, each carved with almost divine precision. She reached toward it, and when her fingers brushed the center, warmth pulsed beneath her skin. A vision bloomed in her mind, a woman made of dawn and dusk, her body glowing like molten gold wrapped in shadow. A voice, gentle yet vast, echoed in Namra's heart. "Child of the eclipse," it said, "you are not the first light but its echo." The world once danced between darkness and flame, and balance was kept by those who could see in both. Namra gasped and stumbled back, but the warmth did not fade. It lingered, gentle and knowing. The whispers in the air turned soft and rhythmic, almost melodic. The shadows continued their quiet dance, circling her like attendants before a queen rediscovered. Overwhelmed, she sank to her knees, tears shining in her eyes like tiny stars. "I am not divine," she whispered, "only unwanted." The air pulsed again, one soft exhale from the living stone. The darkness, as though answering, swirled closer, wrapping around her like a shawl. It did not suffocate her. It embraced her. And when she felt its cool weight on her shoulders, she understood. This darkness was not empty, it was alive, ancient, patient. It had been waiting. Namra lifted her face, her glow illuminating the carvings once more. With trembling lips, she began to hum the lullaby her mother used to sing, the one she had hummed to the cave long before it became her prison. Her voice trembled at first, but as the melody deepened, something extraordinary happened. The air vibrated in harmony. The walls shivered. The shadows pulsed like 1,000 quiet heartbeats, echoing her tune. The hum became a song, wordless, sacred. The cave answered in tones older than language, each note folding into hers like a secret being remembered. The markings on the walls shimmered brighter, revealing their name, the breath of the first light. Namra's glow mingled with the darkness until neither could be separated. In that moment she was no longer alone. The cave, the shadows, the air, all breathed with her. And somewhere deep within that sacred stone, the ancient goddess stirred once more, her forgotten song reborn through the voice of the girl who glowed. The cave trembled softly as Namra's humming deepened, her voice merging with the earth's heartbeat. Shadows gathered around her like curious spirits, their forms shifting between smoke and silver mist. She should have been afraid, but instead she felt a strange calm, as if these dark shapes recognized her, as if they had been waiting. A single tear slid down her cheek, glowing faintly as it touched the cold stone floor. From that tear, a small spark of light emerged, a firefly. Then another. Soon the cave shimmered with hundreds of them, flickering softly in rhythm with her breath. The air, once thick and heavy, now pulsed with quiet warmth. The shadows began to bow before her, their movements slow and reverent. They whispered words she could not understand, but their meaning brushed her mind like a lullaby. "You are the child of balance," they seemed to say. "You are the light that walks with shadow." Namra closed her eyes, and the glow in her irises deepened, spreading across her skin in faint, golden streams. Her hair, once dim with dust, caught the reflection of the fireflies, looking almost celestial. She realized then that she was no longer trapped. The cave had accepted her. Her song grew bolder, filling every crevice, echoing through unseen corridors. The shadows moved with it, like dancers caught in eternal devotion. From the cave walls, ancient carvings began to shimmer faintly, the symbols of the first light that she had seen before. Only now they seemed alive, weaving and glowing as though remembering their own forgotten glory. A soft wind rose within the cave, circling her like a breath of life. Namra opened her palms and felt it pulse through her fingers, the essence of both darkness and dawn. She realized that the light within her was never meant to destroy shadow, but to awaken it, to remind it of its purpose. The whispers turned into voices, clearer now, layered and harmonious. They spoke of an ancient covenant, light born from shadow, shadow born from light. And in that balance life found its rhythm. Namra wept again, but these were not tears of pain, they were tears of knowing. Each one that touched the earth birthed another light, another living spark. Soon the cave was alive, a galaxy of tiny orbs dancing among the whispering dark. The stones that had sealed her in began to tremble. The fireflies rose higher, pressing their glow against the cracks, until the stones softened like wax under the sun. But Namra did not move to leave. She knew her time inside was not over. Instead, she whispered to the shadows, her voice tender and sure, "If you have slept for ages, awaken now, not to destroy but to remember." The darkness sighed, folding itself gently around her like a cloak. The air grew warmer, almost affectionate. She was no longer the cursed child. She was the keeper of the breath between light and night. Outside, the storm had ended, but in the heart of the mountain, something divine had awakened. The cave that once devoured the condemned now glowed like a star hidden beneath the earth, its light breathing softly, waiting for the world to see again. The first sign came quietly, a candle that wouldn't catch flame. Then another. By dusk, every hearth in the village flickered out, no matter how much oil or breath was offered. The air grew cold and damp, and even the stars above seemed to withdraw their shine. A heavy shadow settled across the land, stretching from the mountains to the riverbanks like a living fog. The villagers tried to laugh it off at first, saying it was just a storm's remnant or a passing omen. But when morning came and the fields lay gray and withered, fear began to whisper between them. Corn husks turned to dust in their hands. The goats refused to eat. Even the birds no longer sang. It was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Old women muttered that the spirits were angry, that the eclipse-born girl had been wronged. Men gathered around the chief's hut, demanding answers, but the chief only stared into his cold fire pit, the same pit where Meroa had once stood, her tongue sharp and accusing. Now that same Meroa could not sleep. Each night, she heard faint humming from beyond the walls, a low, mournful tune carried by the wind. When she looked into her water bowl, she swore she saw two faintly glowing eyes staring back at her. She smashed the bowl, but when she blinked, the reflection appeared again, in her window, in a puddle, in the sheen of her own tears. Her husband tried to comfort her, but even he had begun to tremble at shadows. "It's only your guilt," he said, but his voice cracked, and his hands shook as though he, too, felt the unseen gaze. The darkness was not just of night, it moved with will. Children cried that something cold brushed their skin when they walked alone. Doors creaked though there was no wind. The air itself seemed thick, pressing on lungs, whispering in forgotten tongues. Then came the silence. The drums stopped. The laughter vanished. The village, once full of life, now felt hollow as though sound itself feared to linger. Only Meroa still heard the song, soft, rhythmic, coming from the direction of the Cave of Shadows. At first she tried to shut it out by covering her ears. But the melody sank into her thoughts, weaving through her dreams. It was the same tune Namra used to hum while grinding herbs or fetching water. Gentle, soothing, yet now laced with sorrow. Each night the visions grew stronger. She saw Namra walking through the fields, her hair glowing like liquid moonlight, her eyes calm but unblinking. Sometimes she appeared at Meroa's bedside, saying nothing, only watching. Other times her reflection moved even when Meroa stood still. The villagers began to speak of curses. They gathered again at the chief's hut, whispering, "Maybe the girl was not cursed, maybe she was the blessing we buried." Meroa screamed at them, her voice ragged. She brought this. Her light called the dark. But no one listened anymore. They could see what she could not admit. The darkness had come because of what they had done to her. That night, when the moon should have risen, the sky stayed black. The wind carried the faint hum of a song, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Even the old and wise bowed their heads, realizing the truth. The girl of light had taken her glow with her, and without her, the world could no longer see. Meroa sank to her knees in the middle of the dead village square, clutching her chest as tears streaked her face. "Namara," she whispered, the name trembling out like confession. "Come back, bring the light." But the only answer was the echo of her own voice, and somewhere deep within the mountain, the shadows stirred, listening. It began with a shimmer, faint, like the breath of dawn after a long storm. The villagers awoke to find a golden mist crawling down from the mountains, winding through the withered fields and over the sleeping huts. It wasn't sunlight, for the sun had not risen. It was softer, warmer, alive. It glowed as if it remembered something beautiful. Children were the first to see it clearly. They pointed to the sky, gasping as tiny lights, fireflies made of gold, floated above the rooftops. The lights swirled together, forming shapes that danced to a melody carried on the wind. It was the same song Namra once hummed, the one Meroa used to silence, the one that now returned like forgiveness. The villagers gathered outside, blinking against the soft glow that kissed their faces. For the first time in moons they could see each other clearly, the fear etched in their wrinkles, the longing in their eyes. The air was cool but no longer cruel. Someone whispered, "It's her, the girl of light has returned." Old Chief Barani, his hands trembling, took a torch that flickered to life for the first time since the darkness fell. "We follow the light," he said, voice cracking with awe. "It leads to truth." The people moved as one, climbing the rocky path toward the Cave of Shadows. The golden mist thickened, painting the stones with soft hues of amber. The ground seemed to pulse beneath their feet, as if the earth itself beat to Namra's song. When they reached the mouth of the cave, the villagers froze. The stones that had once sealed it were shattered, not by force but by light from within. The charms they had placed to trap her now lay melted into silver dust, glittering faintly in the glow. A hush fell. Then, slowly, a figure stepped forward from the cave's mouth. Namra. Her presence silenced the world. Her skin glowed faintly, as though lit from within by the heart of 1,000 stars. Her eyes shone brighter than the moon itself, and around her feet, the shadows curled like tame rivers of smoke, not dark anymore but shimmering with her touch. Every step she took left behind a trail of fireflies, each carrying a fragment of her light. The villagers fell to their knees. Even Maroa, standing at the back, couldn't move. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw what she had tried to bury, the very thing that now stood reborn before her, divine and untouchable. Namra's gaze swept across the crowd. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm but carried the weight of the mountain. "You sealed me in darkness," she said softly, "but the darkness learned to glow. It became my home, my teacher, my mirror." Tears welled in the eyes of the elders. The children stepped closer, drawn by her warmth, unafraid. Namra knelt and cupped their faces, her light spilling gently over their skin. "Never fear the dark," she whispered to them. "It is only lost light waiting to be found." Behind her, the cave pulsed with quiet luminescence, its walls painted with markings that now glowed like rivers of gold. The very shadows bowed to her, swaying like silk in the breeze. Maroa staggered forward, unable to bear the silence pressing against her guilt. "Namra, forgive me," she cried, her voice cracking. "I thought I was protecting us. I was wrong. I was blind." Namra turned to her, her expression neither cruel nor soft, only eternal. "You feared what you did not understand," she said. "But light cannot hate the hand that tried to hide it. It only waits to return." As she raised her hand, the mist thickened once more, wrapping around the villagers like a golden veil. The fireflies scattered into the night sky, forming a shimmering path back to the village. The people followed in reverent silence, the world around them brightening with every step. Fires rekindled on their own, crops glistened as if dew were made of light, and the once silent drums began to echo faintly in the distance. And through it all, Namra walked among them, not as the cursed girl they once feared, but as the guardian of the glow they had forgotten they needed. The night was silent, heavy with awe and remorse. The villagers knelt upon the glowing earth, their shadows trembling in the light that poured gently from Namra's skin. It was not a harsh light, it did not blind or scorch, but a warm radiance that revealed everything hidden. Every lie, every fear, every drop of guilt shimmered in the open air, stripped of disguise. The wind itself seemed to pause, waiting for her to speak. Chief Barani was the first to bow his head fully to the ground. "Child of the eclipse," he whispered hoarsely, "we were blind and foolish. We believed poison over purity. Forgive us." His words broke something inside the crowd. Cries followed, low at first, then rising like waves crashing against the cliffs. "Forgive us, Namra," they echoed. "Forgive us, light-born one." Some wept into the soil, their tears glinting faintly as Namra's glow touched them. For the first time in many moons, the villagers cried not from fear, but from shame, and in those tears something began to cleanse. At the back of the kneeling crowd, Maroa stood frozen. Her body trembled and her breath came in short, uneven bursts. She could not look at Namra. For every time her gaze even brushed that radiant figure, she saw her own deceit reflected, each cruel word she had spoken, each seed of doubt she had planted, replaying like a haunting echo. Namra turned to her slowly. Her eyes, those shimmering pools of silver light, met Maroa's trembling ones. And in that single glance, the stepmother's strength broke. She fell to her knees, her head bowing low, her voice cracking into pieces. "I was jealous," she whispered, the words clawing out of her throat. "Jealous of your light, jealous that you could be loved for what I could never understand. I told them lies. I made them fear you. I thought if you were gone, I would finally shine." Namra stepped closer, the light around her softening as if the air itself sighed with compassion. Her shadow stretched long across the ground, but even her shadow glowed faintly now, no longer dark. "You wanted the light," Namra said, her tone calm and clear. "But light does not come from taking. It comes from seeing. The light does not hate the dark, it teaches it to see." Meroa began to weep, her tears falling into the soil, and for a moment they glimmered, not as brightly as Namra's glow, but enough to shimmer faintly like forgiveness trying to find form. Namra placed her hand gently upon Meroa's head. "You feared what you did not understand," she whispered, "but fear only grows in the absence of truth. Look around you now, the truth stands before you." The villagers lifted their heads. The air began to hum. The earth beneath their knees pulsed with warmth, and the withered crops along the edges of the fields began to rise again, green and alive. The darkness that had hung over their homes for months thinned like smoke under sunlight. Even the air smelled new, of rain, of renewal, of promise. Children ran forward, their laughter soft but bright, their small hands reaching for Namra's light as if it were made of dreams. Fireflies circled around her, drawn to her heartbeat, until she seemed wrapped in a crown of living stars. Meroa looked up at her, her face streaked with tears and wonder. "You would forgive me, after all I've done?" she asked, voice trembling. Namra smiled, not with pride but with peace. "Forgiveness is light's greatest lesson," she said gently. "For only by forgiving do we remind the darkness that it was once light too." Then she spread her hands wide. A wave of brilliance flowed from her palms, sweeping across the village like dawn reborn. It flowed into every hut, every broken wall, every dying root. The fires rekindled themselves, burning steady in gold. The fields glowed with ripened grain once more. The animals stirred and sang in the distance. The land, which had once turned its face from the sun, now breathed again beneath Namra's glow. When the light finally settled, the villagers found themselves kneeling in silence, surrounded by beauty reborn. Above them, the moon emerged from behind its veil of clouds, glowing silver, its light now reflecting the same hue as Namra's eyes. And in that sacred moment, the people understood that they had never been cursed. They had only forgotten how to see. Namra did not return to the village as a queen or a spirit to be worshipped. She returned as a healer, her steps light and her presence softer than dawn. The villagers, once fearful, now sought her wisdom as they would seek water during a drought. Wherever she walked, the light followed, not as blinding brilliance but as a calm glow that soothed hearts and made old wounds breathe again. She never asked for temples or tribute. Her temple was the silence between the wind and her song, her tribute the kindness she saw in others. In the months that followed, the Cave of Shadows transformed. What was once a prison became a sanctuary. The walls that had once trapped her now shimmered with gentle gold veins that pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth. Those who entered came with burdens and left lighter, for the air within the cave carried Namra's hum, a vibration that healed what sorrow had split. At night, fireflies danced upon the entrance, glowing softly as if guarding a secret too sacred for words. Namra named it the Cave of Becoming. "Here," she said to those who came seeking peace, "light and darkness meet without fear. The shadow learns it was never meant to destroy, only to protect what light could not yet reach." Her words spread across the villages beyond the valley, carried by travelers who swore that the night near her home no longer felt empty. People began to journey from faraway lands to witness it, a cave that glowed without flame, without sun, without reason but love. Namra spent her days tending to the sick, the broken, and the lost. To the children who feared the dark, she told stories of the stars that hid inside every tear. To the elders, she spoke of forgiveness as a bridge between past and future. When she touched a dying tree, leaves sprouted anew. When she sang by the river, the fish returned after years of absence. Her light was not magic, it was mercy made visible. And always by her side came Meroa. Time had stolen Meroa's sight, leaving her eyes veiled in shadow. But where blindness might have brought despair, Namra gave her a new kind of vision, one that looked inward. Together they would walk to the cave, Meroa guided by Namra's hand. Inside, the soft luminescence of the walls reflected in Meroa's tears, though she could not see it. "It's beautiful," Namra would whisper, and Meroa would smile faintly. "I cannot see it," she'd reply, "but I can feel it breathing in me." Meroa spent her final days there, sitting upon a stone bench carved by the villagers in her honor, not as punishment but as penance fulfilled. She listened to the hum that had once frightened her, feeling it ripple through her bones. "This is the same darkness I once cursed," she said one evening, her voice weak but serene. "And now it feels kind." Namra knelt beside her, placing her hand over Meroa's heart. "Because you have learned to listen," she said. "Darkness was never your enemy. It was waiting for you to stop shouting at it." As the days passed, Meroa's breaths grew shallow but her peace deepened. The villagers often found her smiling faintly, her blind eyes turned toward the shimmering walls. On her final night, Namra sat beside her in silence, humming the same melody that had once awakened the shadows. The cave responded, glowing brighter, not with grief but with acceptance. When morning came, Meroa was gone, her body still but her face serene. A single firefly rested upon her hand, glowing softly before taking flight. Namra watched it disappear into the dawn, whispering, "Even darkness finds its way home to light." From that day on, the villagers said that the cave itself carried Meroa's breath, that when you entered with sorrow, you could feel a warmth brush against your cheek, like a mother's forgiveness. People came to the cave not to ask for miracles but to understand them. Namra continued her work for many years, walking between light and shadow, healing with equal love for both. The villagers called her she who taught darkness to glow. And when the moon rose over the valley, the river mirrored her light so perfectly that it seemed the world itself had learned her lesson, that no shadow, once touched by kindness, ever truly stays dark again. Generations passed, and the village that once feared the dark grew into a place where night was celebrated like a quiet friend. Children no longer trembled when the sun dipped below the hills. Instead, they waited eagerly for the soft glow that rose from the earth, the eternal shimmer that lived in the heart of the Cave of Shadows. No one called it cursed anymore. It was known as Namra's Rest, a sacred ground where people went not to escape the dark, but to learn from it. Every family had a story of her. Grandmothers would gather the children around the fires at dusk, their voices slow and rhythmic, the way the old songs were told. "Long ago," they would begin, "there was a girl whose eyes could see even when the world forgot how." And the little ones would listen, wide-eyed, clutching each other as the night breeze whispered through the trees. They would hear about the jealous stepmother, the cave that swallowed a child of light, and the song that made the shadows dance. But what made their hearts ache in wonder was not the magic, it was the forgiveness. The storytellers always paused at the same moment, when Namra whispered to Meroa, "The light does not hate the dark, it teaches it to see." The children, no matter how many times they had heard it, would grow quiet, feeling the truth of it seep through their young souls. They would glance around at the dimness, half expecting to see her silver eyes watching kindly from the distance. Some swore they actually did. Travelers who came through the valley often spoke of seeing two faint lights floating over the river at night, not stars but eyes made of memory and mercy. They claimed that when they followed the lights, they were led safely through the darkest paths, even when storms covered the sky. "Namra guides the lost," the elders would say. "She does not walk beside them, she shines from within them." The village prospered, not through wealth or conquest but through balance. They built homes that opened to both sunrise and moonlight, teaching children that neither brightness nor darkness alone made the world whole. Every year, on the anniversary of Namra's return, they held the Festival of Glow. The people lit lanterns carved with symbols of light and shadow, then set them floating down the river toward the cave. The sight was breathtaking, hundreds of tiny suns drifting into the night, their reflections like constellations reborn. At the festival's end, the oldest woman in the village would recite the ancient proverb passed from Namra's time. "Sparkles, the cruel may bury the light, but it will teach the darkness to shine." Sparkles. The words were whispered by children before sleep, carved into stones near wells, painted on door frames and sewn into wedding garments. They were no longer just a saying, they were the heartbeat of the people. Sometimes, during the quiet hours before dawn, a hush would fall over the land. The cave would glow faintly, breathing in rhythm with the stars. Those who happened to be awake would swear they could hear a hum rising from within it, the same melody Namra once sang to the shadows. And if one listened closely, the glow seemed to move like a pulse, as if the earth itself remembered her heartbeat. Parents told their children that this was Namra's way of reminding them that even when they could not see the light, it was still there, changing, teaching, waiting. The darkness, they said, was not punishment but promise. And so, in that land where cruelty once thrived, people grew to love the night. They learned to speak gently to their fears, to find grace in what they could not yet understand. When storms came and candles went out, no one panicked. Instead, they looked to the walls, where faint specks of light always appeared, tiny, patient, and familiar. They would smile softly then, whispering to one another, "The darkness is learning again." And somewhere deep within the Cave of Shadows, where the air still carried her song, the light pulsed once more, eternal, forgiving and alive, glowing like the eyes of Namra.